The pounding on the front door was sharp and unrelenting, and it jolted me out of sleep in a way that made my heart slam against my ribs like a trapped animal. I reached for my wife and whispered that she was back again, the one neighbor who never seemed to sleep, the one who lived to find fault and spread chaos. Her name was Kerren, and tonight she was no longer content with filing complaints or scribbling letters. She was rattling the lock and jiggling the handle of our brand new home. The security camera light blinked outside, bathing the porch in a cold glow, and I could see her in the monitor wearing that ridiculous bright pink tracksuit that made her look like a misplaced neon sign. She had sunglasses balanced on her head, though it was midnight, and her hair was tied too tightly into a bun that made her face pinch into permanent disapproval. She hissed to herself as she shoved at the door, muttering about inspections and violations. I felt the weight of anger rise, but more than that, a cold fear settled in, because this was no longer petty harassment. This was trespass. This was danger. My wife slid silently out of bed, her movements precise, controlled. She was the kind of person who never panicked, and in that moment her calm steadied me. She whispered to keep the camera rolling, to keep the evidence clean. We stepped into the living room, and I pulled the curtains just a crack. Kerren was pressed against the door, craning her neck, as though she could see through the walls. Her expression was wild eyes, bulging lips, curled in something that looked more like hatred than concern. When I unlocked the deadbolt, just enough to swing the door halfway open, the motion startled her. She stumbled back, then puffed herself up like a cornered animal. "This is HOA property," she snapped, pointing her finger into the dark air. "I have the right to inspect whenever I suspect violations." My voice shook with anger, but I kept it low and steady. "You were trying to break into my house." Kerren barked out a laugh, shrill and unhinged. "Break-in, no. I was performing a safety check. Do you want this community to fall apart? Do you want everyone to think you are above the rules?" Before I could answer, my wife stepped into the light, her posture, with straight shoulders, squared eyes locked on Kerren in a way that made her falter. For just a second, my wife did not say much, but her presence spoke volumes. It was a kind of steady authority that unsettled people who thrived on bullying. Kerren's face twisted at the sight. She spat the words like venom. "I will not be intimidated. This is not over. I will make sure the police know what kind of people you really are." She turned on her heel, her pink tracksuit glowing under the street lamp as she marched down the path. I closed the door slowly, the sound of the lock sliding back into place echoing in the silence. My wife exhaled only once, and it was sharp-clipped. She looked at me with the kind of clarity that left no room for denial. "She is not done," she said. "People like her never stop. They escalate." Her words sent a chill through me. I glanced back at the monitor and saw the empty driveway, the quiet street. Yet something about the way Kerren had spoken lingered like smoke in the air. I tried to shrug it off, but deep down I knew my wife was right. We turned off the lights and headed back upstairs. The sleep was gone. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow outside seemed stretched into her figure. I told myself she would cool down, that the night would swallow her madness. But then the faint sweep of headlights cut across the window. Hours later, someone had slowed their car at our curb, the engine idle for a breath, then rolled on as if nothing had happened. I lay there staring at the ceiling, knowing the silence was temporary, knowing that when morning came, this battle with Kerren was only just beginning. And though I could not explain why, the thought gnawed at me that the next move she made would not just test our patience, but change everything in ways neither of us could yet imagine. The next morning, the shrill sound of sirens shattered the fragile quiet of our street. I rushed to the window, and there she was standing in the middle of the cul-de-sac, flailing her arms like a conductor of chaos. Kerren was waving down two patrol cars, her pink tracksuit catching the sunlight in a way that made her impossible to ignore. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, and some stepped onto porches the way people gather when they sense drama brewing. The officer stepped out calm, deliberate, but Kerren pounced. Before they could even shut their doors, she jabbed her finger toward our house, her voice cutting through the air. There are those people attacked me last night. They are dangerous. They should not be allowed in this neighborhood." Her words stung not because they carried truth, but because of the confidence with which she lied. It was astonishing to watch someone spin fiction with such certainty. The officers exchanged a quick glance, then walked toward our front door, their expressions unreadable. My wife met me at the base of the stairs, already composed. She told me not to panic, not to let anger cloud what we had to do. She opened the door before the knock could land and greeted the officers with a calm, steady voice. "Good morning, officers. How can we help you?" Kerren stormed up behind them, practically shoving them aside. "Do not be fooled," she screeched. "She attacked me when I came to check their property. I have bruises. Look." She pulled at her sleeve, but the pale skin underneath was flawless. The lie was so outrageous, it almost felt theatrical. One officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, we are here because of a complaint. We just need to hear both sides. I kept my phone in hand, the video from the night. Before ready to play, my wife gestured toward the security camera above the door. Everything was recorded. You can see exactly what happened. We pulled the footage up on my phone, the grainy black and white, showing Kerren yanking at the lock, jamming her shoulder into the frame. The officers leaned in their brows, furrowing, as they watched Kerren's furious face. Contorting the glow of the porch light, the silence that followed was heavy. Kerren's expression cracked for first time, her mouth open and closed, but the words caught in her throat. She tried to recover, lashing out. That footage is doctored. They are tech-savvy criminals. Everyone knows they are a problem. Her shriek rang hollow. The officer straightened, one of them rubbing his chin, clearly unconvinced by her claim. Still, it was protocol reports to be filed, procedures to follow. Before they could speak again, something shifted in the air. The second officer froze, staring at my wife, his eyes widened with recognition. He whispered the word, almost reverently, "Commander." My wife blinked surprise, but then a faint smile touched her lips. "Sergeant Miller," she said quietly. The street seemed to still. Even the birds fell silent. The officer straightened, as if pulled by invisible strings. His demeanor changed. Instantly gone was a suspicion, replaced with respect, and something heavier, memory. He saluted without hesitation, his voice carrying a weight Kerren could never match. "Ma'am, I had no idea you saved lives out there. I owe you mine." Kerren's jaw dropped. "What is happening? Who even is she? She is just some homeowner." The officer ignored her. He spoke only to my wife, steady and sure. "I will personally make sure this is handled correctly." My wife's reply was calm but edged with iron. "Then you know exactly what kind of danger false accusations bring. You know how serious this is." Kerren sputtered, unable to reconcile what she was seeing. Her authority, her imagined power, crumbled in the face of something far greater. She stomped her foot like a child denied a toy. "You're all lying, conspiring against me. This is corruption." The first officer finally cut in, his tone sharp. "Enough, ma'am. We have the footage. We have the facts. You need to step back." But Kerren could not stop. Her voice rose to a screech. "I will not be silenced. I will make sure everyone knows what you are hiding. You cannot protect them forever." Neighbors whispered from porches, phones raised. A recorded performance she staged was unraveling before an audience she had not planned for. My wife looked at her, not with anger, but with something closer to pity. "Careful, Kerren," she said evenly. "You are digging your own grave." The officers guided Kerren back to her side of the street. Though she fought them every step, her shrieks, echoing through the cul-de-sac. The neighbors shook their heads, some muttering under their breath, the spectacle too absurd to ignore. When patrol cars finally pulled away, the silence they left behind was suffocating. Inside, my wife set her phone on the counter, her hands steady, though her eyes burned with the fire of someone who had seen too much to ever be rattled. She told me this was only the beginning, that Kerren was far too obsessed to stop. Now her kind thrived on escalation, and humiliation only made them strike harder. I wanted to believe it was over, that the truth had been laid bare, but deep down, I knew she was right again. I could feel in the way Kerren had screamed, the way her eyes had locked on us with unhinged fury. There was no retreat in her, only the promise of another storm. And as I stood by the window, watching the last of the neighbors retreat into their homes, a single thought coiled in my chest, heavy and undeniable. This was not the end of the fight. It was the opening act of something far worse yet to come. Kerren did not retreat. She regrouped and came back sharper, louder, and more desperate. Her campaign of harassment shifted gears into something relentless. Every morning there was a new notice stuffed into our mailbox, violations that made no sense, accusations that we had too many cars, too much noise, even a flag hung at the wrong angle. She filled the HOA page online with rambling posts about dangerous newcomers, about corruption, about conspiracies that only she seemed to see. The neighbors grew. Restless, some whispering doubts, others rolling their eyes at the drama, but all of them watching us as though we were the epicenter of something unstable. My wife remained unshaken. She told me that people like Kerren only had one weapon, spectacle, and that the best way to disarm her was to turn her own chaos against her. That meant patience, that meant timing, that meant letting her pride push her further into the trap she was building for herself. The chance came one warm Saturday afternoon. We organized a neighborhood barbecue. Nothing extravagant, just food, music, and laughter, but enough to draw the whole street out into the open. My wife knew Kerren could never resist a crowd. She wanted an audience. She wanted to be the enforcer. She wanted control. And sure enough, right as the first grill smoke curled into the air, she stormed up the sidewalk in her ever-present pink tracksuit, her voice shrieking before she was even close. "This gathering is illegal. This neighborhood has rules. You cannot just throw parties whenever you feel like it. The music cut slightly, neighbors turning with startled looks, plates paused midway to mouths. My wife did not flinch. She raised her voice, clear, steady, cutting through the noise. Actually, Kerren, we thought today would be a perfect day to show everyone something important. I wheeled out the small projector onto the patio wall, and press play. The footage sprang to life, grainy, but undeniable. Kerren's own face twisted in anger, her hands gripping our door handle, her shoulders slamming against the frame. The crowd gas phones came up, recording the scene, not just on the wall, but Kerren's real-time collapse as she realized every single person was seeing her for what she was. She screamed over the images. This is fake. This is all fake. They are criminals. They doctored this. But the laughter and murmurs around her drowned her protests. A neighbor whispered too, loudly not to be heard, "That looks pretty real to me." Another said, "She always acted like she ran the place. Now look at her." Kerren tried to charge a projector, but before she could even reach it, the wail of another siren echoed down the street. She had called the police again, thinking it would save her from humiliation. The same officers stepped out, their expressions already wary. The one who had once whispered commander gave my wife a small nod, and then turned his gaze on Kerren. "Ma'am, we warned you about false reports. We warned you about trespassing, and now this." He gestured at the projection, still playing in the background. The neighbors recorded every word, every gesture, every ounce of her unraveling. Kerren's face flushed, deep red veins standing out on her neck as she screeched, "You are all conspiring. You cannot treat me like this. I am the vice president of HOA security." The officer's voice was sharp, final. "There is no such position. You invented it. You are under arrest for attempted break in filing false police reports and harassment." The neighbors erupted into cheers and applause. The sound of justice delivered in real time. Phones captured the sight of Kerren thrashing against the cuffs, screaming promises of revenge that had no power anymore. Her pink tracksuit caught the sunlight one last time as she was shoved into the back of the patrol car. When the street finally quieted, the tension lifted like a fog. Neighbors approached us, some apologizing for doubting us, others thanking us for finally standing up to her. My wife accepted their words with calm grace, but her eyes were still sharp, as if measuring the weight of every person's loyalty. She had been through battles before, and to her this was just another kind of battlefield. Later that evening, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, and by nightfall, Kerren had been stripped of every title, every imagined authority. The same people who once trembled before her now distanced themselves completely. No one wanted to be tied to her downfall. Inside our home, the silence felt different now, lighter, safer. My wife poured herself a glass of water and looked at me with that knowing calm. People like her always dig their own graves. You just have to give them the right tools. I laughed, though it came out tired, the kind of laugh that releases days of tension. She wanted an audience, and she got one. My wife's eyes softened a fraction. And now she has consequences. But even as I leaned back on the couch, a flicker of thought stayed with me. The footage, the spectacle, the neighborhood cheering, none of it was confined anymore. Phones had recorded everything. Social media would soon spread it wider than any of us imagined. And while Kerren sat in a cell, somewhere the world outside our little cul-de-sac was about to see her too. The war in our neighborhood was over, but the story was only just beginning. The night after Kerren's arrest, the neighborhood was strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy with unspoken words and unasked questions. Every porch light seemed brighter, every curtain pulled back, as if the entire cul-de-sac was waiting for the next chapter to unfold. My wife sat at the dining table, her posture straight, her face calm, but I could see the weight in her eyes. She had endured worse than this in her life, but the civilian battlefield had its own poisons, gossip, suspicion, judgment. I asked her if she felt relief now that Kerren was gone, if even temporarily, but she only shook her head slowly. Relief is dangerous, she said. Relief makes you lower your guard, and people like her never disappear completely. They wait, and they claw their way back if you give them an opening. Her words were not dramatic. They were precise, measured. She had a way of looking at conflict, as though it were a chessboard, every move considered, every counter foreseen. Days passed, and the footage spread beyond our street. Neighbors had posted online, and within hours, it was viral. Millions of strangers laughed and jeered at Kerren in her neon pink suit, calling her the queen of HOA's attire in the suburbia. Memes flooded in her name, twisted into jokes, her shrieking face immortalized in endless loops. And while we should have felt vindicated, I could not shake the creeping thought that the storm was not over. It was merely changing shape. The board of the HOA scrambled, trying to salvage their image. They called meetings, spoke of reform, insisted that Kerren was a rogue element, not a reflection of their values. But the truth was they had let her run unchecked for years, because she was loud, because she was ruthless, because it was easy to let her control others and confront her themselves, now stripped of her power. They looked weak and fractured. My wife watched them unravel with that. Same quiet calculation. And I realized she was studying them not for vengeance, but for protection. She understood that leadership, even accidental leadership, was fragile. Then came the day when the police returned to our street, not with sirens, not with cuffs, but with questions. They wanted my wife to speak publicly about what had happened. They wanted her voice because the world had already decided she was more than a victim. She was a figure of authority, a calm center in a storm. And though she hesitated, I saw in her eyes a decision forming. She had led before in far darker places. She would not run from it here. The night of the community gathering, the crowd was larger than I had ever seen. Neighbors filled the street, reporters hovered at the edges, and cameras blinked red in the shadows. My wife stepped forward. No pink tracksuit, no false authority, no shrieking, just presence, real authority that did not need to be shouted. She told the truth plain and sharp. She told him about boundaries, about safety, about what happens when fear and arrogance are left unchecked. She never once raised her voice, yet the silence around her was absolute. Kerren's name was never spoken, but her shadow hung over every word. My wife ended with a sentence that cut through the night. Respect is not enforced with threats. Respect is earned by how we treat each other. The applause that followed was not wild, but steady, solid like the beat of a drum. It was the sound of a neighborhood waking from a long sleep. And then, almost as if the universe wanted one final act, Kerren appeared, dragged into the gathering by two officers. She had violated her bail, ranting outside City Hall, waving signs, accusing everyone of conspiracy. Her voice carried even as she fought the cuffs. "You cannot erase me. I am the law here. I built this community." The crowd recoiled and laughed, the sound rolling over her in wave. The officers read the charges, new ones piled on top of the old: harassment, violation of bail, disorderly conduct. The spectacle was undeniable. Kerren had returned for one last stand. But it was not the triumphant stage she had imagined. It was her collapse in front of everyone. My wife did not gloat. She simply watched with the same steady calm she had worn since the beginning. And I understood then that this was the true difference between them. Kerren fed on control, demanded obedience, and feared silence. My wife led with stillness and earned loyalty without asking. As the patrol car pulled away for the final time, the street erupted not in chaos, but in laughter and cheers and the kind of joy that comes only when a shadow is lifted. Neighbors shook our hands. Children ran freely, without parents glancing over their shoulders. A cul-de-sac felt lighter, like air after storm. Later that night, as we sat on the porch together, I asked her if she thought it was over. She tilted her head, her eyes reflecting the dim streetlight. "This battle is over," she said. "But there will always be another Kerren. Somewhat important thing is that we are ready for them." I looked at her, then really looked at her, and realized that she was more than my partner, more than my wife. She was the quiet strength that held the line, the reason our home stood unbroken against the storm. And in that realization, I felt something deeper than relief, something close to pride. The story of Kerren would live on as ridicule, as entertainment for strangers online. But for us, it was something else. It was proof that justice sometimes comes not through shouting, but through patience, not through rage, but through calm, relentless truth. And though the world had laughed at Kerren, though the internet would not let her name fade, the victory that mattered was quieter. It was a piece of our home, the knowledge that we had stood firm, and that in the end, the storm had broken against us, not through us. And with that thought, I leaned back into the night, ere the weight finally lifting, knowing the war was finished and the silence at last was truly ours.